There comes a moment, quiet, piercing, and irreversible, when a person relinquishes the hope that the world will ever truly understand them. It is not a dramatic scene. There is no audience, no applause. There is only a silence that settles deep within your bones. It is the silence of realizing that no one is coming to fix what is broken, that no one else is staying up at night consumed by the shape of your pain. And in that profound quiet, something ancient awakens. It is a strength that does not beg or explain, a strength that has no need to be seen. This is the moment you stop performing and start becoming. For while the world may be indifferent, you do not have to be powerless. The Stoics understood this long ago. They knew that true power is born in the ashes of expectation, and in that death, your real life begins. Most of us carry a quiet fantasy that our suffering is visible, that if we just hurt enough, someone will step in, that if we just find the right words, someone will finally understand. It is a soft, unspoken hope, woven into the very fabric of our upbringing. If I am in pain, the world will care. But then, life unfolds. Pain is overlooked, tears go unnoticed, and the phone remains silent. And in that silence, something shifts. You begin to see the illusion for what it is, not a reflection of your worth, but a mirror to how consumed others are by their own chaos. Everyone is battling something you will never fully see, just as they will never fully see you. To build your identity on being seen is to condemn yourself to a life of feeling invisible, to that quiet, persistent ache of being overlooked. This isn't cruelty. It is reality. And if you look closely, it is a reality trying to teach you something essential. When we are young, we believe that pain deserves recognition, that suffering indebts the world to us for comfort. But life does not hand out medals for endurance. It does not dispatch angels when you are on your knees. It simply moves on. People continue with their lives. Others forget. Strangers scroll past, not from malice, but because they are drowning in their own concerns. This truth may sound harsh, but its harshness does not make it any less real. And here lies the strange, transformative twist. That realization, as painful as it is the first step toward becoming free. Because once you stop expecting the world to respond to your pain, you stop waiting. You stop freezing your life in the hope that someone will notice you are stuck. You begin to move for reasons that have nothing to do with applause. Carl Jung once said, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you." But experience teaches a harder lesson that Jung left unsaid. Most people don't ask because they care. They ask so they can fit you into a box that makes sense to them. They do not see you. They see their idea of you. And when you stop performing for that external gaze, you finally begin living for something real. There is a sobering sorrow in realizing you are not the main character in anyone's story, but your own. This is not rejection. It is simply gravity. No one owes you their understanding. No one is required to hold your hand through the fog. And while this can make the world feel colder, it also forces the fire of your inner world to burn all the brighter, because now you are the one who tends the flame. No more waiting for someone to read between the lines of your silence. No more hoping your quiet breakdown will be noticed and gently mended. You understand now, and that changes everything. The disappointment that once stung you transforms into something else. It becomes clarity. And clarity is the first taste of freedom. This is where the Stoics found their strength, not in being untouched by pain, but in refusing to outsource their healing. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "Do not waste what remains of your life in speculating about your neighbors." In other words, stop hoping someone else will see your wounds and name your value. The more you focus on being seen, the less you see yourself. And ironically, the more invisible you become, just noise in someone else's life, rather than a clear signal in your own. But when you finally let go of the hope that others will witness your suffering and grant it weight, you begin to build something indestructible. Not because you have grown harder, but because you have become clearer. Their neglect is not a verdict on your worth. It is merely a reflection of their own humanity, flawed, overwhelmed, and distracted, just like you. The game was never about being seen by them. It was about waking up to the fact that you were always watching. You have been the sole inhabitant of your mind, the only true witness to the full weight of your thoughts. That is not a curse. It is a gift. It means you are the one with the power to change the narrative. Not them. You. There is power in being unseen, a profound clarity in walking a path that requires no audience. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it." This is what happens when you stop hoping to be seen. You start becoming. Not for attention, not for recognition, but because something inside you refuses to stay small. The pain that once felt unbearable becomes your blueprint. The silence that once haunted you becomes your teacher. The solitude that once scared you becomes your home. And when that shift occurs, you no longer need to broadcast your wounds. You simply carry them differently, not as a burden, but as proof that you kept going. Perhaps being overlooked was never the tragedy you thought it was. Perhaps it was the beginning, the slow, quiet death of an illusion, and the birth of something real, something solid, something that no longer seeks validation because it is too busy building a world of its own. You do not need to be seen to become great. You need only to see yourself, clearly, honestly, and without decoration. That is where everything changes. That is where your real life begins. When no one listens, something unexpected happens. You start listening to yourself. Not to the surface voice that echoes what others expect, but to the quieter one underneath. The one you've ignored because it wasn't loud enough to compete with the world's noise. In the absence of applause, this silence grows roots. You begin to hear your own thoughts, not as background static, but as guidance. It feels strange at first, even uncomfortable. You are used to checking your reflection in the eyes of others. But when those eyes turn away, you learn to see yourself from the inside out. You begin to move differently, not because someone told you to or because someone believed in you, but because you decided to show up for yourself. Without witnesses, without cheerleaders, without anyone holding the door open. Self-reliance does not arrive in a sudden burst of confidence. It arrives slowly, often disguised as loneliness. You wake up one day and realize no one is checking in, and instead of falling apart, you start building. You begin taking yourself seriously, not because others do, but because you have grown tired of waiting for a permission that may never come. Real power begins not in being chosen, but in choosing yourself. The world teaches us to seek validation like it is oxygen, but the Stoics knew that peace is found not in popularity, but in discipline. As Epictetus said, "No person is free who is not master of themselves." Freedom comes from knowing that even when you are not supported, you will continue. That even when the room is empty, you will do the work anyway, not out of bitterness, but because the work matters, because you matter. When you understand this, showing up ceases to be a performance and becomes an act of self-respect. In that quiet space, a new relationship forms, not with the world, but with your own mind. You begin to trust it. You ask what it needs. You listen to the fatigue in your body, the pull in your gut, the fire in your chest. You stop outsourcing your intuition. As Carl Jung wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." That awakening is not a dramatic breakthrough. It is a series of subtle, consistent decisions that build a foundation beneath your feet. You keep your promises to yourself. You take the walk. You write the words. You say no when something drains you. These are not loud acts, but they build something invisible from the outside. Trust. And trust in yourself is the currency of freedom. There is a quiet strength that develops when you realize you are your own backup plan. When the silence no longer scares you. When you no longer need to announce your every move or explain your every feeling. You stop begging for someone to notice you are trying, because you already know. You know the effort you are making, the storms you have walked through, and what it took to still be here, choosing growth over collapse. This is not arrogance. It is integrity. You are no longer performing for the world. You are becoming for yourself. And when people pause as you enter a room, it is not because you demanded their attention, but because your energy quietly states, "I don't need it." Seneca wrote, "The greatest empire is to rule oneself." And ruling yourself looks like consistency in the face of invisibility. It looks like doing what matters even when no one applauds. It is holding your standards high when no one is watching. When you build from that place, you become the structure. You do not collapse when someone pulls away or misunderstands you, because your foundation was never built on their understanding. It was built on clarity, on quiet decisions made in solitude, on the strength of waking up and moving forward, again and again. And once you begin to rely on yourself in this way, you stop resenting others for not being who you needed them to be. You release them from the burden of your expectations. You no longer tie your progress to their presence. You move forward regardless, not with coldness, but with grace. You become free, not because the pain is gone, but because it no longer defines your path. You carry it, but it does not carry you. That is what true self-reliance looks like. A deep, inner steadiness that says, even if no one sees me, even if no one comes, I will keep going. Because this life is mine to live, and I will not wait for anyone to give me permission to become who I was always meant to be. We live in a world that rewards exposure, where every wound is displayed for comment. We have been taught that the more visibly broken you are, the more attention you receive. But not all attention is healing. Some of it is hollow, keeping you dependent on being seen as wounded to feel connected. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to perform your pain, packaging your suffering for sympathy, turning real emotions into content. What was once sacred becomes consumed. But there is a difference between honesty and emotional performance. One comes from depth, the other from habit. Most of us were never taught to distinguish them. Not everything needs to be narrated. Some things must be felt, endured, and integrated in silence. The Stoics were not emotionless. They were composed. They believed in feeling deeply, but without letting those feelings steer their lives. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Be like the cliff against which the waves continually break, but it stands firm and tames the fury of the water around it." He meant, do not let your emotions become a performance. Let them become presence. Some parts of your story are sacred precisely because they belong only to you. To keep something private is not shame. It is protection. And that unnerves people, because silence cannot be dissected, pitied, or praised. It demands space. The deepest transformations happen when no one is watching, when you are sitting with your thoughts, choosing not to respond, not to prove, not to explain. When you let your emotions pass through you without needing them to be seen, liked, or validated. That is not suppression. That is sovereignty. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, still, and completely uninterested in being understood. You do not have to narrate your healing in real time. You can keep it for yourself and let the results speak later. That patience, that refusal to perform, is what gives you power. There is a beauty in becoming unexplainable, in no longer offering your pain as a currency for connection. When you stop broadcasting your wounds, you stop attracting those who are only there to observe the damage. Slowly, you begin to attract those who respect what you have built in silence. The moment you realize your emotions are not a commodity for attention, you stop spending them so carelessly. You guard your inner life because you understand its rarity. You see how much power was lost in seeking to be understood by people who lacked the depth to understand themselves. Real vulnerability is not exposure. It is discernment. It is knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. You do not need the world to validate your emotions for them to matter. You can heal without display. You can grieve without an audience. And when you do, you stop fearing the silence. You begin to feel at home within it, because it no longer feels like abandonment. It feels like a return to yourself, to what is real. Sovereignty begins the moment you choose presence over performance, the moment you realize your peace is not fragile, but forged in solitude. You don't owe anyone a front row seat to your healing. Some things are meant to be held close, some truths whispered only to yourself. In a world that glorifies noise, that kind of quiet becomes its own form of rebellion, its own form of freedom. Rejection feels personal because it touches a primal need to belong. But often what feels like rejection is actually redirection. You were not dismissed for a lack of value. You were pushed aside because your depth could not be digested by shallow eyes. Your silence was mistaken for absence, your self-containment for coldness. You were misunderstood not because you failed to express yourself, but because you carry a frequency most people are not tuned to. That does not make you wrong. It makes you rare. The world celebrates what is easy to label, consume, and predict. When you do not fit into those neat boxes, you become inconvenient. It is easy to internalize this as a flaw, to think that softening your edges would grant you acceptance. But that is the trap. The belief that your value lies in being legible to others. You were not made to shrink into their comprehension. As Carl Jung wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who others can easily understand, but who you are when no one is watching, and you have finally stopped seeking their approval. That kind of authenticity often comes at the cost of comfort. It invites misunderstanding. It requires solitude, but it is the only path that leads back to yourself. This space, however, invites a profound transformation, one not driven by applause, but by a quiet alignment with your true self. A point arrives when you cease to interpret rejection as loss and begin to see it as a gift of clarity. Every person who overlooks you, every space that does not welcome you, every silence that follows your presence, it all reveals something. Not about your worth, but about where your energy simply does not belong. That insight is priceless. It saves you years of self-doubt and teaches you to invest where you are valued, not merely tolerated. Once you learn this, the chase for explanations ends. You stop wondering why you weren't chosen, and you realize that not being chosen was the blessing that gave you back to yourself. A quiet revolution begins when you release the need to be understood. The energy once spent pleading to be seen is reclaimed, redirected into the silent, steady work of building. Something that needs no explanation. Something that stands on its own. A body of work. A way of life. A discipline. You shift from a state of emotional scarcity, constantly proving your worth, to one of psychological sovereignty, where your existence is no longer up for debate. Your center of gravity moves inward. You are not swayed by approval nor rattled by dismissal. You become grounded, and grounded people are magnetic, not because they seek attention, but because they carry a stable center in a world that spins too fast. People will still misread you. They will invent stories to make sense of your quiet, your ambition, your boundaries. Let them. You are not responsible for correcting every false narrative. As Marcus Aurelius said, the opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject. You are the subject, and most people do not know you. They see glimpses, fragments. They project, assume, and simplify. While that once bothered you, you now see it for what it is: noise. The moment you let go of the need to correct the noise, your focus sharpens. You accomplish more. You sleep deeper. You move with a cleaner energy because your life is no longer built around being perceived correctly. It is built around being lived truthfully. There is immense peace in that. You stop wasting energy explaining your process, your priorities, your silence. You don't justify why you've gone quiet or walked away. You don't decode your boundaries for others. You simply live them, not as a defense, but as a natural extension of self-respect. You become someone who moves with conviction, not commentary. Over time, this creates distance, not between you and others, but between you and the noise that once clouded your mind. Rejection becomes revelation when you realize it did not shrink you. It sculpted you. It showed you where not to go, who not to become, and what not to settle for. Every closed door clarified your direction. Every silence refined your voice. Every betrayal deepened your discernment. What once felt like exile now feels like space. Space to build. Space to breathe. Space to finally become not someone acceptable, but someone undeniable. This shift, this movement from wanting to be seen to choosing to become, changes everything. You stop speaking merely to be heard and start speaking to build. You stop entering rooms to prove your worth and start entering them already knowing it. You stop asking if you are too much and start asking if the space is too small for your truth. You stop apologizing for your depth and start protecting it. This isn't arrogance. It is arrival. So if you have been overlooked, let it be your initiation. If you have been misunderstood, let it be your turning point. You are not here to explain yourself into someone else's comfort. You are here to become someone whose presence rewrites the room. And that begins when you finally understand. Rejection is not the end of your worth. It is the beginning of your clarity. We are taught to fear loneliness, to see the absence of others as an absence of worth. But solitude, when chosen with intention, is not isolation. It is transformation. It doesn't shrink you. It burns away everything that doesn't belong. At first, it feels like a heavy, echoing silence. But slowly, that silence sharpens into a mirror that does not lie. And what you see there, in the absence of distraction, is not your weakness. It is your foundation. Solitude does not destroy you. It reveals what was always there, underneath the noise. The craving for approval, the impulse to please, the subtle performances you didn't even know you were giving. These begin to melt away in the furnace of being alone. In their place, something harder, something real begins to form. It is in that stillness that you meet yourself honestly. Not the version curated for others, but the raw material of your mind, your values, your fears. This is precisely why solitude is so terrifying for many. Because when there is no one left to impress, no one left to chase, you are finally left with the truth. No performance, no edits, just you. And while that may feel like loss at first, it is the beginning of freedom. As Epictetus wrote, it's not things that disturb us, but our judgment of them. In solitude, those judgments become visible. You begin to see how many of your thoughts are not your own, how many fears were inherited from another's voice. This is where the internal alchemy begins. The discomfort doesn't vanish, but it transforms. Loneliness refines into privacy. Exile clarifies into freedom. You start hearing your own voice, louder than the world's opinions, and that voice, uncensored, unpolished, unafraid, teaches you how to live. You begin to understand that peace is not found in a full calendar or a crowded room. Peace is found in presence, in being able to sit with yourself and not flinch. That is not detachment, it is mastery. As Carl Jung said, "He who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Solitude forces you to look inward, to awaken. And with that awakening comes responsibility. You can no longer blame the noise for your confusion. It's just you now. And that is where the power begins. The moment you stop externalizing your life, you reclaim the ability to direct it. You start building your compass from the inside out, and it points to something sturdier than attention. It points to integrity. Most people avoid solitude because the discomfort is a mirror to what is unhealed. But you don't become strong by avoiding yourself. You become strong by confronting yourself without an audience. This is the difference between solitude and isolation. Isolation is running away. Solitude is running deeper. In that deeper place, your resilience is formed. Quietly, consistently, without applause. You begin to make decisions differently. Not from a place of, will this be accepted? But from a place of, does this align? You trust your instincts more, because you have spent enough time with them to separate intuition from insecurity. That is a level of self-knowledge that cannot be taught. It must be earned, through silence, through space. That kind of clarity doesn't shout, but others feel it. In the way you speak, in the way you move, in the way you no longer chase what used to pull you apart. Your boundaries become sharper. You learn that no is not unkind. It is honest. And honesty, cultivated in solitude, becomes your way of living. You no longer need to prove anything, because you have done the work in silence. And now, your energy speaks for itself. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Solitude pulls you out of imagined disasters and plants you in what is real. And in that soil, something unshakable grows, a sense of self that doesn't shift with trends, a strength that isn't loud but lasting. When you return to the world, you come back different, not distant, but deliberate, not bitter, but boundaried. You are not easily swayed, not easily shaken, because you know the ground you stand on. You built it yourself, one quiet moment at a time. Solitude is not punishment. It is preparation. It is the training ground for self-trust, self-respect, and self-direction. It is not where life ends. It is where it begins to deepen. The person who has learned to walk through their own mind, alone and awake, becomes someone the world cannot easily move because they no longer belong to the noise. They belong to themselves. There is a quiet turning point in every life when the self you thought essential begins to dissolve. Not in a sudden crash, but in a slow, certain erosion. The person who needed approval, who bent themselves into shapes that did not fit, that self becomes a heavy, outdated shell. You try to carry it a little longer, out of habit, but it drags, it stiffens, and eventually it falls away. This is not failure. It is evolution. When something dies within you, it is not always a loss. Often, it is the clearing of ground for a more honest existence to take root. At first, It is disorienting. The old mask no longer fits. The old patterns feel exhausting. You say less, but what you say carries more weight. The chase for approval fades, and in its place, something steady begins to grow. You move with more intent. You don't perform your personality to make others comfortable. You simply stand, like a mountain, still, watchful, unmoved. Some people will distance themselves. They will say you seem colder, more distant. What they are really sensing is that you have withdrawn from the game of constant reassurance. You are no longer addicted to being liked, and that absence makes people uncomfortable. But that version of you needed to go. It needed to fall away so you could finally move freely, so you could stop editing your truth to fit someone else's narrative. As Jung wrote, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it." You didn't kill your old self out of hatred. You outgrew it out of truth. You don't need to explain this process. The people who truly understand won't ask, and those who don't were never meant to walk with this next version of you anyway. You begin to notice who respects your silence and who only knew you for your noise. That clarity is painful, but it is necessary. It separates the seasonal from the lifelong. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The disappearance of your old self feels like a loss, but it opens a path where you no longer chase connection, but attract it by being grounded in who you are. You don't seek mirrors in others anymore. You have found your own reflection, and it is enough. There is something sacred about becoming someone who no longer needs to announce their change. You just live differently, and the difference becomes impossible to ignore. People feel it in your energy, your decisions, your detachment from petty dramas. They sense a calmness in you that cannot be faked, because it was earned in the quiet dismantling of your former self. What once triggered you no longer does. What once drew you in no longer holds your attention. At first, this feels like loneliness, but then it becomes freedom. You realize you were never truly connected to those people or places. You were attached to the persona you had to become to stay there. And now, that person is gone. As Seneca said, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." This is a rebirth. And like all rebirths, it is quiet at first, uncelebrated, but incredibly real. With time, it becomes undeniable, not because you announce it, but because you embody it. You become someone who moves with quiet authority, whose absence speaks just as loudly as their presence once did, not out of pride, but out of peace. The old self was necessary. It got you here. But its time is over. You owe it nothing but gratitude and release. And now, in its place, you stand, clearer, stronger, unapologetically you. No longer looking back for validation, no longer reaching forward in desperation, but grounded, here, now, whole. And that, more than anything, is what makes you impossible to categorize. You have stopped being what the world told you to be. You have become who you were always meant to be. True presence is not measured in volume, but in weight. It is born from how little you need to say. There is a quiet power that emanates from someone who has ceased to seek validation, a gravity in their stillness. They do not need to announce their presence because their energy carries it for them. They don't push to be noticed, yet they are the ones people watch. It is the confidence of someone no longer hungry for permission to exist. In a world obsessed with appearances, this kind of restraint is magnetic. Real strength is quiet, not hidden, but uninterested in performance. It is the product of someone who has met their fear and sat with it, who has walked through pain without turning it into a spectacle. As Jung said, A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. When you have done that internal work, silence becomes a statement. You stop reacting to every opinion, not out of apathy, but out of alignment. You understand that if someone does not feel your value, no amount of words will make them see it. So you conserve your energy. And when you do speak, people listen, not because you are louder, but because your words were earned, rooted in something real. There is power in that detachment, not the cold kind that pushes people away, but the self-contained kind that does not cling to outcomes. When you no longer rely on others to affirm your worth, you free them, and you free yourself. That freedom makes you light, but it also gives you a profound weight. Your self-possession unsettles those still measuring themselves through the eyes of others. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good person should be. Be one." That is the essence of commanding without words. You don't try to be impressive, you embody what you value. And the irony is, when you stop trying to be impressive, you become unforgettable. Not because you shouted, but because your silence had depth, because your stillness had direction. You weren't trying to win the room, you were rooted in something deeper than performance. People mistake this for disinterest, but it is the highest form of clarity. It means you can engage without being absorbed, be present without being performative, care without clinging. When someone cannot be shaken by judgment or baited into overreacting, they become an immovable force. And we do not just respect such forces, we adjust ourselves around them. This is what separates the grounded from the attention-hungry. The truly grounded do not compete for the spotlight, for they carry their own light within. They are not in pursuit of the next compliment, nor do they seek connections built on performance. Instead, they are crafting something quiet and enduring, a foundation that does not crumble when the room falls silent, nor shift with the tides of public opinion. And people notice. They always do. In a culture that rewards the loud, the steady become a quiet mystery. Those who feel no need to prove themselves begin to radiate a sense of having already achieved something far more profound. Self-mastery. There is no need to chase recognition when you move with intention. No need to justify your pace when you trust your own timing. The less you say, the more space you leave for others to simply feel who you are. And when your presence is built on depth, not performance, it leaves an indelible imprint, not because it was loud, but because it was real. As Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Quiet power is built upon this principle. You decide who you are, and then you live it. Not for applause, but for alignment. This is why certain people command attention without ever asking for it. They do not chase it. They do not demand it. They simply move in alignment with who they are. And that kind of presence, grounded in inner stillness, will always speak louder than noise. It does not need to shout. It simply is. A strange and profound freedom arrives the moment you stop needing to be cared for. Not because you have become bitter or numb, but because you have finally outgrown the illusion that your strength is dependent on the validation of others. It is a subtle but permanent shift within. The world no longer holds the same power to shake you. Its silence does not unsettle you. Its applause does not seduce you. You begin to move from a different center, one that does not ask for permission, does not beg to be seen, and does not fall apart when it is ignored. This is the paradox. True power is gained not when you are rescued from pain, but when you no longer need rescuing from the discomfort of standing alone in your own truth. For so long, we are taught that care from others equals safety, that we must be heard to feel real, understood to feel valid. But there is a deeper truth. Power is not something bestowed upon you by attention or recognition. It is something forged in silence, brick by brick, with the choices you make when no one is watching. And so, once you stop craving the emotional resources of others, something remarkable happens. You become your own source. You realize you were never powerless. You were just waiting for permission to be strong. It begins, as Carl Jung suggested, with the terrifying act of complete self-acceptance, not just of your strengths, but of your fears, your darkness, your disappointments. You accept that perhaps no one will ever understand you or love you in precisely the way you had always hoped. And rather than fight it, you simply exhale. You cease to resist what is. You stop trying to control how others feel about you. And in that surrender, a new kind of control emerges, not over people or outcomes, but over yourself. You stop explaining what needs no explanation. You stop trading pieces of your soul for temporary comfort. You no longer make yourself smaller to be palatable. You no longer soften your voice to avoid tension. You simply stand in your own life, unfolded, unedited, and let the pieces fall where they may. Some people will move away, and some will draw closer, but none of it changes the core of who you are. For now, you are the one who defines your worth. You have stopped outsourcing it. You have stopped chasing love as proof of your existence, and because of that, you are no longer fragile. You are rooted. This does not mean you stop feeling, or that you walk through life untouched. It means you stop expecting the external world to fix what only internal clarity can heal. You realize that your healing is not a group project. You understand now that peace is built alone, and it is maintained by protecting that solitude, not by constantly inviting others in to validate your progress. You no longer need to be mirrored in someone else's eyes to know that you are whole. The mirror is now internal and it does not distort. You also stop fearing disconnection, because the deepest connection, the one with yourself, has already been forged. That is what makes you strong. Not cold, not distant, but self-contained. People can come and go. You can love and be loved, but your foundation no longer shakes with their presence or their withdrawal. This is not detachment from life. It is engagement on your own terms. This is what true autonomy looks like. You stop being a guest in your own mind. You become the architect. It is as Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." When your attention is no longer hooked by who notices, who cares, or who stays, you redirect that energy inward. Not in isolation, but with intention. Your focus shifts. The questions change. It is no longer, "Why did they treat me this way?" but rather, "What can I build from this?" You begin to turn pain into discipline, silence into strategy, and disappointment into design. You are no longer waiting for a wave of validation to carry you. You have become the current. This kind of power, this quiet, untouchable strength, is not given. It is forged in the moment you stop waiting for others to meet you, and instead, finally meet yourself, exactly where you are. From this meeting place, a more honest self arises. One that is no longer edited for applause, a direction no longer swayed by the fear of being misunderstood, a life that is finally and wholly your own. You become someone who moves with clarity, not desperation, someone who can hold space for their own emotions without leaking them into every interaction, someone who does not crumble when the applause stops, because your rhythm was never built around their noise. You do not need an audience to know you are on the right path. You simply know. So when you feel that need for external care begin to fade, do not mistake it for loss. It is a return, a reclaiming, a sharpening of the soul. You have taken back the most important thing, the ability to guide yourself, to walk through disappointment without folding, to be unseen without disappearing, to be misunderstood without abandoning yourself. This is the point where everything changes. Life begins to move in your favor, not because the world suddenly understands you, but because you have finally stopped needing it to. In that space, you become unshakable, not because you were born that way, but because you chose to be, again and again, until your mind finally believed that you were already enough. You realize you do not need to be seen to be powerful. You do not need to be understood to be whole. The moment you stop waiting for the world to validate you is the moment you begin to shape yourself into something it cannot ignore, quietly, fully, and without apology.